Hello everyone. I hope you all are doing great. God could not be with us, so He made mothers. I would say both the parents, because both the parents can do anything for their children. If they wish, they can take away all the pains from their life and provide all the wonderful gifts of this world. Seemingly, it looks so beautiful, so touching, so emotional, but actually, it also provides great harm to their own children, whom they love. It hinders their growth, their development. Rather, parents should provide challenges to their children, difficult situations, conditions, so that they learn how to win over them. Why am I talking about this? Because today we will learn the chapter, A Triumph of Surgery, in this video, in which a lady, Mrs. Pomfrey, does a great harm to her pet, Tricki, whom she loves unconditionally. Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Teaching Learning with Purnima once again. And today we will learn the chapter A Triumph of Surgery by Dr. James Herriot. The writer of this chapter, James Alfred White, is better known with his pen name James Herriot. He is a British veterinary surgeon and writer. Due to his experience and love for animals, James Herriot has written many books and articles about animals. He can sense animal needs, diseases, nature, behavior, and their habits. Due to this, he could treat a dog, Tricki, without any medication. This dog falls sick and becomes inactive due to obesity. For this pitiful condition of Tricki, his owner, Mrs. Pomfrey, and her extra love and care is responsible. She used to feed dog without any control, without any limit. This story touches the theme of good parenting and bad parenting. It differentiates between good parenting and bad parenting. Some parents, due to their overlove for their children, cannot cannot define the limits, and they go on showing their love. They are not able to strike a fine balance between strictness and love. And Mrs. Pomfrey is one such parent who cannot refuse her pet, Tricki, due to which Tricki falls sick. This chapter advises the parents to be prudent, wise, and disciplined, and they should be able to maintain a balanced approach while raising their children. They should be able to say no when it is required. Now let's see a detailed summary of the chapter. Owing to Mrs. Pomfrey's love, extra care, and overfeeding, Tricki became hugely fat, too much fat, and he was looking like a bloated sausage, a piece of meat which is overfilled or stuffed. When she took her dog out for a dog, Dr. Herriot saw her and the dog. He also advised Mrs. Pomfrey not to give Tricki so much food, keep a strict diet, as well as to give some exercise also to Tricki. But Mrs. Pomfrey could not refuse the dog. When dog wanted food, when dog was looking inactive and weak, she used to think that dog needs food, and she used to give more food. She could not understand that dog does not need food, rather dog needs exercises. And that is why Mrs. Pomfrey was giving food and more food, and Tricki was becoming obese, more obese, inactive, unhealthy, and finally sick. He did not feel like eating, playing, or doing anything. His tongue was coming out. And Dr. Herriot understood that dog is going to fall sick, and very soon Mrs. Pomfrey is going to call him. And the same thing happened. Being worried, Mrs. Pumphrey contacted Mr. James Herriot because she knew that dog is not going to be well. And Dr. Herriot suggested that Tricki needed to be hospitalized for 14 days, a fortnight. Mrs. Pumphrey was terrified to hear this. She could not bear this idea of being hospitalized and she fainted there only. But she soon got in her senses. She sent Tricky's beds, bowls, and cushions with him. But these beds, bowls, and cushions were not used in the hospital. Mrs. Pumphrey put all these things in doctor's car, but doctor took them and put all these things in the surgery and they were not used because doctor knew that these things cannot make the dog well. These things are not required that time. What was required that time? Physical activity. Tricki was kept there in the surgery among street dogs. And street dogs were very active. They were running here and there. They were jumping. They also sniffed Tricki. They tried to interact with Tricki, but Tricki was inactive, motionless. And then street dogs went away. Tricki was not given anything, any food for 2 days. He was given a lot of water only. We can understand that doctor was very wise. He was intelligent. He knew what is required. There were other dogs, which were street dogs, as I told you. Unlike Tricki, they were very active, fast, furious. Third day, when food was served, Tricki felt a little hunger and he wanted to have food. He also went there, he tried to get food, but the street dogs were very fast. They finished the food in no minute and Tricki was left waiting. He did not know he didn't know the scarcity of food. He was habitual of luxurious lifestyle. He used to get food without even asking. That is why he doesn't know how to struggle for food. But he had to compete with other dogs for food if he wanted food because the food was limited. As he was habitual of luxurious lifestyle, he didn't know the scarcity of food. He used to get food without even asking, and that is why he didn't know how to compete for food. But if he wanted food, if he didn't want to remain hungry, he had to learn how to compete for food. But slowly, slowly, he also learned how to compete for food because nobody can remain hungry for more than 3-4 days. Slowly, he learned to fight for food. And then he got to know the real taste of food. Same thing applies in our life also, in small children's life also. If parents give them without even asking, they will never understand the value of that thing. If the parents want that children should know the value of money, value of things, value of natural gifts which are given to us by God, then they should struggle for that thing. Slowly, he also started jumping and playing with other dogs. He was convalescing, recovering. Slowly, slowly, he was becoming active and healthy. During this time, when medication was going on, when treatment was going on, Mrs. Pumphrey used to send eggs, wine, and brandy so that Tricki should become healthy. You know, habits. Bad habits do not go easily. Mrs. Pomfrey was habitual of overfeeding her dog. Here again, she is doing the same thing. She thought that Tricki will become healthy, Tricki will enrich his blood with the help of wine, red wine, and that is why she used to send these things. But what the doctor did, doctor didn't give any of these things to Tricki. He knew Tricki does not require them. Rather, he himself consumed all those things, all the eggs, wine, and brandy. He also shared these things with his partners and friends. For some time, he was tempted to keep Tricki as his guest forever, because if he keeps Tricki as his guest, he would enjoy all these things himself. But rationally, he thought and he decided that he should call Mrs. Pomfrey to collect Tricki, because Tricki completely recovered within the time period of 14 days. When Mrs. Pomfrey came to collect Tricki, he joyfully leapt into her lap. He started licking, he started jumping, he also started snatching his mistress' face. And this shows that Tricki was very happy. Dr. Herriot decided that he will not tell her the secret of Tricki's treatment, because he knew that people like Mrs. Pomfrey would never understand that without giving any food and giving lot of water only can solve a problem. And Mrs. Pomfrey, what she thought that this is the result of good medication and surgery. And that is why she was so happy. She thanked the doctor and she said, "Doctor, this is the triumph of surgery, that my dog is so active and healthy." But this sentence, as well as the title of the chapter, is ironical. Now let me tell you what is irony. Irony is about our belief, our saying, our words, our actions that we do. If these things go in contrast of reality, if we are unaware of the reality and we say something which is just opposite of reality, that saying or those words become ironical. As I told you earlier also, Dr. Herriot didn't tell the secret of Tricki's treatment. And Mrs. Pomfrey was unaware of this secret. She thought that recovery of Tricki is due to surgery and medication. And that is why she said this is the triumph of surgery. But in reality, no surgery or medication was given. That is where we find irony in the chapter. This chapter gives a beautiful message, especially for the parents, that their overcaring and overprotective attitude can make their children weak and vulnerable. These children won't be strong enough to face any difficulty. Parents need to understand that growing children need rough and tough environment to become competent, to become more capable and strong to meet the challenges of life. Life is not going to be so sweet to them. Parents are very sweet, but life is not that sweet. We need to prepare our children for life. And that is why we need to give them challenges instead of overcaring and overprotection. Now some important question and answers for you. What does the story convey? Are there parents like Mrs. Pomfrey who unknowingly do great harm to their children? Yes, there are. Nowadays, there are the parents who unknowingly do great harm to their children. You can pause the video and read the answer. What kind of a person do you think the narrator is? Would you say he's tactful as well as full of common sense? Thank you. Keep watching my channel. Keep learning with me. If you like my videos, subscribe my channel. Bye bye. All the best.